Henry Ford was born into a world where progress moved slowly and production depended almost entirely on human strength, individual skill, and scattered craftsmanship. In the late 19th century, factories were not engines of efficiency, but collections of habits, traditions, and compromises. A product was built from start to finish by small groups of skilled workers, each relying on experience rather than systems. This approach created pride, but it also created limits. Production was slow. Quality varied. Costs were high. Most people could not afford the things that were made. Progress existed, but it was narrow and exclusive. Ford grew up surrounded by this reality, and unlike many of his contemporaries, he did not romanticize it. He was not impressed by craftsmanship for its own sake. He was fascinated by function. He watched how people worked and noticed something others ignored. Most effort was wasted, not because workers were lazy or incompetent, but because the work itself was poorly designed. Tools were misplaced. Tasks were repeated unnecessarily. People moved more than they needed to think. Ford became obsessed with one question that would define his entire life. Why must work be so inefficient? While others dreamed of faster horses or better artisans, Ford looked beyond individuals and focused on structure. He believed that progress was not the result of talent alone, but of organization. Machines, in his view, were not symbols of power, but instruments of clarity. A machine did not get tired, distracted, or emotional. It followed logic. Ford wondered what would happen if human labor could be guided by the same principles. Not controlled, but supported. Not pushed harder, but arranged smarter. His early experiments reflected this mindset. He failed repeatedly, building engines that broke, companies that collapsed, and vehicles that never reached the market. Yet each failure refined his thinking. Ford was not learning how to build cars. He was learning how work should flow. He concluded that complexity was the enemy of scale. If a task could be simplified, it could be repeated. If it could be repeated, it could be scaled. And if it could be scaled, it could reshape society. At a time when automobiles were handcrafted luxuries for the wealthy, Ford envisioned something radical, a car for ordinary people. Not elegant, not customizable, not prestigious, but reliable, affordable, and easy to repair. This vision was not driven by compassion alone. It was driven by logic. Ford understood that mass adoption required mass production, and mass production required systems that removed variation, hesitation, and waste. Long before the assembly line existed, the philosophy behind it was as Henry Ford's vision matured, he realized that the greatest barrier to mass production was not technology, but organization. Engines existed, steel existed, labor existed. What did not exist was a system that aligned time, motion, and human energy towards a single objective: efficiency. Traditional factories built one car in one place. Workers walked endlessly, searched for tools, adjusted parts, and improvised solutions. To Ford, this randomness was not flexibility. It was failure disguised as tradition. Inspired by processes outside the automotive world, including meatpacking plants, Ford began to imagine production as flow rather than task. Each worker would perform one action in one place repeatedly. Not because humans were limited, but because repetition created mastery. He broke complex assemblies into their simplest motions and studied them relentlessly. How far did a hand move? How often did a worker bend? How many seconds were wasted between actions? Every unnecessary movement was treated as an enemy of progress. When the moving assembly line emerged, it was not a single invention, but the physical expression of this philosophy. The line dictated rhythm. Parts came to workers instead of workers chasing parts. Tools were placed at precise heights. Workstations were redesigned to follow the body's natural motion. In a revolutionary reversal, machines adapted to humans rather than humans adapting to machines. The results were historic. Assembly time for a single Model T dropped from more than 12 hours to under 2. Costs collapsed. Consistency soared. Cars that once required elite craftsmen could now be assembled by ordinary people with minimal training. Production scaled at a pace the world had never witnessed. Critics warned that such repetition would destroy creativity and reduce workers to mechanical extensions. Ford disagreed. He believed confusion exhausted people more than repetition ever could. When workers knew exactly what to do, when to do it, and how to do it, anxiety decreased and focus increased. Mental clarity, in his view, was humane. Yet the transition was not painless. Turnover skyrocketed as many workers rejected monotony. The system demanded discipline, punctuality, and conformity. Ford responded not by slowing production, but by increasing wages and shortening hours. His famous $5 day was not generosity. It was system maintenance. Stability reduced chaos. Retention preserved efficiency. The assembly line transformed more than factories. It redefined time. Speed became measurable. Efficiency became currency. Reliability replaced improvisation. The automobile shifted from a luxury to a utility. Cities expanded. Roads multiplied. Daily life reorganized itself around mobility. What Ford proved was profound. As Ford's system spread, its impact reached far beyond industry and into the structure of society itself. Productivity was no longer defined by individual skill, but by design. The system mattered more than the person within it. This shift was both revolutionary and unsettling. Skilled craftsmen who once controlled their pace now answered to the rhythm of the line. Pride in personal mastery gave way to pride in collective output. Ford believed this was not a loss, but a trade. In exchange for repetition, workers gained stability. In exchange for specialization, they gained predictability. Wages became regular. Hours became structured. Life outside the factory became orderly because life inside followed rules. Work no longer spilled into chaos. It followed schedules. But Ford's systems did not stop at the factory gates. He believed instability anywhere created inefficiency everywhere. Inspectors monitored workers' personal lives, judging habits, finances, and morality. To many, this was invasive and authoritarian. To Ford, it was systems thinking applied to society. A stable worker, he believed, required a stable life. Critics accused him of control and hypocrisy, especially as his views hardened. History would later examine these beliefs critically, separating innovation from ideology. Yet while debate raged, the effects of his system spread uncontrollably. Other industries adopted standardization and flow. Governments studied his factories. Nations learned that organized production could decide wars and rebuild economies. The middle class expanded as goods became affordable. Ownership replaced dependence. Mobility replaced isolation. Workers became consumers, sustaining the very systems they powered. This interdependence stabilized economies, but also made them fragile. When production slowed, lives stalled. When systems failed, millions felt it at once. Ford, as the industrial age matured, Henry Ford no longer stood at its center as a commander, but as a presence embedded in its structure. His ideas outgrew him. The systems he built continued to operate by momentum, guided by principles rather than personality. Yet Ford struggled with this reality. He trusted his logic deeply and resisted change, even as competitors refined his methods with flexibility and choice. Still, his deeper legacy endured. Ford changed how humanity understood work itself. Labor became something that could be designed, optimized, measured, and refined endlessly. Problems were no longer obstacles, but inefficiencies waiting to be reorganized. Ford believed that chaos was tolerated, not natural. Order was discovered through thinking, and thinking, he insisted, was the hardest work of all. Most suffering in labor, he argued, came not from effort, but from wasted effort. Motion without purpose drained the body. Confusion exhausted the mind. Poor systems destroyed motivation. By reducing tasks to their essence, Ford believed he was protecting human energy, not stripping it away. Repetition, when intelligently structured, became mastery. Predictability created confidence. Confidence allowed ordinary people to achieve extraordinary output, not through talent, but through alignment. Yet systems carry danger. When they become rigid, they forget the humans they serve. Ford's failure was not building systems, but believing they should remain static. Progress demands constant redesign. Still, the modern world breathes through Fordian logic. Schools, hospitals, airports, software, algorithms all follow the language of flow, optimization, and measurement. Ford democratized productivity. He assumed no genius, only consistency. In the end, Henry Ford did not offer perfection. He offered a method, a way of seeing. Progress, he showed, is not accidental. It is engineered.